you.
Yes. All right.
Get these out of your way.
Thank you. So I have to tell you all, a few months ago, Rebecca shared this idea of this Lent series with me, and she asked if I would be interested in kicking it off today, as the first week. And I proceeded to just bombard her with all my ideas of what I would talk about, which included Marie Kondo, of course, quantum physics, Shintoism, and the Enneagram. And she still said yes. I don't know how she's going to feel at the end of this, if like she thinks that was a good idea or not, but I had a lot of fun with it, and I really hope that it'll be helpful for you, because it's less serious. It's definitely more playful than I often get to do when I'm preaching or doing spiritual direction, and so this is going to be really fun. So I'm going to warn you, I'm going to go to a bunch of weird places, but I hope that we can bring it back around, because all of this really is about what it means for us to get free. And certainly that's what Lent is about. But I hope that this will maybe make us think about these things that we've thought about if we're Christians for a long time, and maybe a unique and different way. So as Casey already said, I'm hoping this works. Oh, good. There's sweet Marie Kondo, and it seems like some of y'all are familiar with what she does. So her approach to organization is pretty deceptively simple. She has you divide your house into 5 basic categories, and you pile each category up in one particular location. So all the clothes in one pile on your bed, and then she makes you look at it, which is smart, because you're like, wow, I really don't need that much stuff. And then she has you go through the pile and ask yourself whether each item sparks joy or not. And if it does, you keep it, and if it doesn't, you say thank you and you let it go. So she admits that at the beginning of this process that a lot of people have a hard time feeling like they're going to know and discern what it means for them to spark joy. But she promises them that if they just commit to the process and they continue, their sense of joy will be honed. And by the end, it just starts to get easier for them to realize, oh yeah, this is what it feels like for something to spark joy. So when I started reading about Marie Kondo and I watched her Netflix series, has anybody else watched the Netflix series? It's just so great. I was obsessed because I was like, she is doing spiritual work. She is a spiritual director, And I could tell that she came from a background of Shintoism, and I actually learned in her biography that she, as a teenager, was an assistant at a Shinto shrine, which actually is apparently a normal teenage job, so that doesn't make her deeply unique. But she has this sense of appreciation for spirituality in all things, and that certainly comes across her work. But I have a few inklings about why Marie Kondo has become this international sensation, and it just so happens that they're actually also really helpful life lessons. And I do think that they offer us these blessings, these lessons of what it would mean for us to tidy up our souls. So I wanted to talk tonight, actually, assuming that I'm going to be the speaker that speaks the most about Marie Kondo, being the introductory person. I don't think Lauren Winner is going to come and talk about Marie Kondo, but you should for sure come to talk about Lauren Winner because she's amazing. I want to share 3 things that I think we can take as people of faith during the season of Lent from what Marie Kondo teaches in her practice. The first one is that everything matters and everything is connected. So the reality is we have been culturally conditioned to believe that our stuff doesn't mean anything. Right? It's expendable, lifeless, and easily replaceable. But inside, all of us actually believe that stuff matters. We don't just believe it, we know it. We know it matters. So when Marie Kondo came around and actually invited us to make good on this deep truth that we believe in but don't live into, something inside so many of us screamed yes. Because most of us have enough evidence at this point that living as if our stuff is expendable has some drawbacks. Not least of which is that we have also been living as if our entire world is expendable, and as it turns out, that's not a sustainable way for us to live, right? So as the climate crisis reaches this critical level, we realize we can't possibly continue to live this way. The other reason I think this resonates is because trying to live disconnected, even if that's disconnected from our sweaters, is just not life-giving for us, and also it just doesn't work. It makes us unhappy. It's utterly unsatisfying for us to try to float above our actual lived lives as if we're not affected by things, because we are affected by things. We live in a world that's by design deeply and endlessly interconnected. So we can pretend that we're islands all we want, but it doesn't make it true. Ignoring our connections only makes us feel isolated. It's only when we start to pay attention and honor those connections that we feel less fragmented and we feel like our lives might actually have meaning. Dharma no Murcha, the author of the book Quantum Theology that I happened to be reading when Rebecca asked me to talk about this, she was, I'm sure, delighted about that. He wrote, "Our current travesty as a human species is that we have largely lost the capacity to love and to be lovely. We have succumbed to the crude and cruel functionalism of our mechanized culture." We have arrived at this crude and cruel functionalism because, short history lesson, since the industrial age, we've been on this mission to mechanize culture. We became reductionists. And reductionism is, just as you would suspect, that practice of breaking things down into its smallest possible part. Scientists did this when they whittled all the way down to the atom, and then subatomic particles of proton, neutron, and electron, and then quantum physicists came along and they added the quark underneath that as an even smaller thing. Philosophers like Descartes came along and they whittled reality down to knowing one thing: I think, therefore I am. That's the one thing we can know for sure when we get rid of all the other things that could just be, delusion, right? And then theologians did the same thing. They decided to write about God through systematic theology, which whittles ideas of God into smaller and smaller categories, and then they have to explain it. And then by the end, you just don't even know what's happening anymore. Can I get an amen from everybody that had to go to systematic theology classes in seminary? Amen. Like, where's God? Where did the wholeness go? I don't know. We just divvied it up so much they got lost. So on and so forth. So listen, some of this is helpful. It's a really handy way of learning about something. Every electrician and plumber and mechanic has to learn how to fix a car by learning how to take it apart first. So there's some really good, helpful things that come from reductionism. But here's what happened. We got overly excited about the project of taking things apart, and we stopped being able to see the connections. We stopped teaching our children and other people in society, as a society, to look for connections, because we kind of stopped knowing how. So to put this another way, in the modern industrial era, we became something like mechanics who could take a car apart, but either didn't bother or didn't know how to put it back together and make it whole again. So even worse, reductionism has this unfortunate side effect of turning everything into an it. If you're familiar with Martin Buber, he talks about how it's so important for us to try to live into I-thou relationships that are built on this sense of holiness and respect. Well, reductionism actually did the opposite of that. It was all I-it relationships. We just saw things as objects, right? And when you do that, when reductionism finishes its project, what we're left with is a world without value and meaning and depth and sense. We become people who see our stuff as expendable, lifeless, and easily replaceable. So here's where quantum physics comes in. I know you're waiting for it. Here's where it's coming in. Because it's actually revealed that the world does not actually work that way. All of this stuff, this matter, it's made up of energy. It is energy, actually. There is no lifeless stuff. That's not a real thing that we can say about things. There are only different forms of energy. So this is what made my head explode when I was reading this, well, one of the many things that made my head explode when I was reading this book, Quantum Theology. He says, matter and light are ultimately interchangeable. Okay, I'm going to say that again just in case you missed it. Matter and light are ultimately interchangeable. He says matter is nothing but gravitationally trapped light. Okay, think about everything can we say about light? I mean, I preached about Transfiguration a couple of weeks ago. Think of all the songs and the prayers and the metaphors and the symbols and the hymns that we say about how light transforms us, how light is this presence of God. And then think about how matter is simply light condensed into a particular space. That feels important, right? It makes more sense now that the Greek word logos is related to the Hebrew word dabar, which means creative divine energy. The logos and the dabar, the word of God, is God's creative divine energy. And that just makes more sense when you think about the quantum world, that all of this stuff is energy and light. The Gospel of John says, all things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. There's a wholeness at work to this energy because it's not isolated. It's not like there's these separate energy farms that are operating, and not talking to one another. No, everything is connected. It's all just different forms of the one kind of energy. They have different force fields when they gather in certain ways. And those force fields, which Omerta calls horizons of belonging, which I do not have time to talk to you about, but oh my word, fascinating. These force fields affect the energy around them, but it's still all one big web of energy. So scientists have spent millions of dollars trying to figure out how to separate quarks. Now, why would they do this? I don't know. First of all, they were trying to figure out what's up with the relationship between quarks. Do you remember that? So the weird thing about these quarks is that they can be right next to each other, and then you can take one of them and take it to China, and then you do something with this one and this one reacts. It's called spooky action at a distance. Yeah, really, you can Google that. I did not make that up, although it's cool. I wish I had made it up. How can you, when you tap on this one, does this one change? This one shudders, this one vibrates when you make a sound over this way? How? It's not even close to one another, right? So they were trying to figure out first, okay, well, how do these relate to each other? And then they thought, well, what would happen if we broke the relationship? So they spent millions of dollars trying to figure out how to break the relationship between quarks. And here's what they discovered. This is an actual quote from the book. Quarks give up their family connections stubbornly and then decay in a micro instant, as if they had no way to survive outside of relationship. I read that and I was like, I knew it! Everybody says when I go around talking about original blessing and connection and relationship that it's all just theological mumbo jumbo. Well, it's not. It's actually true to the quantum level. And actually on all the other levels too. This is the truth of the universe, y'all. We are deeply, deeply connected. Deeply. And when that is severed, which takes millions of dollars and a bunch of bored scientists to do it, we dissolve in an instant. We cannot live outside of relationship. And also, not to freak you out too much, but quantum scientists will tell you that time and space also don't really exist, but we can't talk about that because it really freaks me out, and I don't know how to get up at 7 and eat breakfast when I start thinking about that stuff. But basically, we can at least start accepting that our categories of separation, we have to use them so we don't go crazy, but they're delusional. It's not actually real. It's just stuff to help us get us through our day, right? There is a fullness and a unity to the created world that we just walk around ignoring all the time because we can't see it. Jewish Kabbalah teachings say that there is nothing, not even the tiniest thing, that is not fastened to the links of this great chain of being. Everything is catenated in its mystery, caught in its oneness. God is one. All the worlds below and above are all mysteriously one. The entire chain is one. Down to the last link, everything is linked with everything else. So the divine essence is below as well as above. In heaven and on earth, there is nothing else. There is nothing else. There's no outside. Everything is connected, everything is related, and God is everywhere present, which is why our stuff matters. All this stuff, all this trivial stuff, no, it's not trivial, it all matters. And so that changes the way that we approach things. Which takes us to our second lesson. Pay attention to your connections. If this stuff matters, then the way that we're connecting to all this stuff also matters, right? Since everything is connected, since there are these force fields that do affect us, it makes sense that we should be mindful of them. Because the truth is that things aren't lifeless, but sometimes our connections to them are. This is why some things really work for your friends and it just does not work for you. Whether that's like a television show or a form of prayer, the kind of person they like to be in relationship with. Like, I would not want to go out with that person. You seem really happy. Okay. You do you. Right? For me, no. Everything has life in it, but not every connection that we have has life in it. So we have to be mindful about the kinds of connections that we're making. So when we pay attention to our connections, our experience of life actually has the capacity to broaden and transform. I once read this article. This is a story. I'm sorry, but I have to tell you because it's so fascinating. I told you I was going to take you a bunch of places today. It doesn't fit in a sermon, so I cannot do it on Sundays. I once read an article, they're like, why do we give her this much time? About this man named Gordon Hempton. He was this bike messenger in Seattle. He liked his job because it allowed him to be outside on his bike, and he loved his bike. And he loved to be outside in Seattle, which is a really beautiful city. I was actually just there. Although the pay wasn't that great, he just loved his job. Mostly, though, what he liked about his job was that he had all day to listen. And that's the thing that Gordon likes to do more than anything, is listen. He listened to the sounds of different cars ambling down the highway. He listened to the sound of the wind through the ponderosa pines, the sound of the birds chirping on the telephone wires. And eventually, he started to get a hunch about what he was hearing. He started to think, I feel like when I go from this side of the city of Seattle to this side of the city of Seattle, it's like the birds are following me. Like I can hear them kind of passing off their song like they're passing a torch. And it just captivated him. So he decided that he was going to save up money and try to figure out if he could go all over the place and listen. He wanted to be a professional listener, which I did not know was a job. It's amazing how many jobs you can have. But for years he saved up until at last he had enough money to pay for a trip that took him 4 months and 70,000 miles around the globe. And what he did was he tracked the sound of the birds at dawn. And what he discovered in his recording is that there is, to quote, a never-ending wave of birdsong that follows the Earth's rotation, as if the sun never stopped rising and the birds never stopped singing. What? And he says, you wouldn't possibly be able to hear it unless you traveled 70,000 miles and really started trying to listen. But it's been there all along. He turned that trip into this documentary for PBS, which won him not only national acclaim, but also an Emmy. The reason I love that story so much is because the idea that we are living in a never-ending wave of song should feel familiar to us of all people, right? Is this not what we declared to be true just a minute ago when we said that we join in the chorus of angels and archangels and with all the company of heaven who forever sing this hymn to proclaim the glory of God's name? Part of the wholeness that underlines everything is the harmony of God. This is God's song. This is God's energy. And it is constantly being sung over us. It is a symphony and a never-ending melody. And the reason that we sing the liturgy, and the reason every single religious tradition ever sings and chants, is because that somewhere deep inside we know that this attunes us to the holy. It puts us into congruence with the song of God that's echoing over us all the time. And if we quit our jobs and went in search of that song, we would find it. We'd pile up evidence of God's good and harmonious creation, like little cassette tapes that we'd put in little dated cases, and we'd put them nicely in boxes that Marie Kondo would be so delighted and proud of us for. Omerta writes that our primary call is to be listeners at the heart of our world. A quantum theologian said that, because he understands that there's this deep connection between the way that we see that energy and the way that we interact with that energy, and when we start listening to it, we start to change, because we start to believe it. When we pay attention to our connections, we can only experience the truth that everything is relational and everything is connected and God is everywhere present. The reason that Marie Kondo became an international sensation is because she gave us a concrete way to experience the truth of the universe, which is that it is sacred down to our sock drawers. It matters. And we matter, and when we start to pay attention, we find joy and purpose and meaning and freedom. It's so interesting that Kondo says that her clients, so often after they do this project, they experience these radical life changes. They change jobs, they lose weight, they leave relationships that were lifeless, they go after dreams that they've been ignoring for 20 years, they get healthy, they get happy, they say their relationships are better than they ever were before. They feel, in a word, free. And that seems like, what does that have to do with your sock drawer? But I don't know, if everything's energy, and you're gathering up all the stuff that you want the most around you, it seems like you just start to do that in your whole life. Why stop with the socks? Right? Enneagram teacher A.H. Almas says that all of our Enneagram... Okay, how many people are in here that are Enneagram people? Oh, good. Okay, good. I'll explain it for the rest of y'all, too. Okay. Enneagram...
Class on Sunday.
Ooh, come to the class on Sunday. And then just to be... Is he talking about the Enneagram?
No.
Okay. So A.H. Almas says that all of our Enneagram type fixations happen because we lose touch with our awareness of unity. Okay, so the Enneagram, you have these 9 personality types. And each of them comes from this same place of the harmony of God, right? But for some reason, in these 9 distinct ways, we all experience this twist. This, he calls it a twist. It's a nice way of saying our delusion. We have this particularly delusional way of seeing reality falsely. So depending on your Enneagram number, you might see it only as people are trying to attack you, or everything is you should be scared of everything, right? You have this twist that makes you unable to see it. And the way that you make a path back to the holy virtue that is in your number is you've got to figure out how to undo that twist so that you can see clearly. Right? To find your way to that holy virtue, that holy idea, you have to go beyond what your mind knows and open yourself to experience capital E essence, the ground of all being, the divine energy that makes everything alive and real and whole. Because when we experience essence, that's when we transform. That's when that twist that seemed so true starts to be obviously a delusion. We don't get trapped in that personality fixation that we had before. We can just start living free. When we transform, we're set free. So pay attention to your connections. Which ones are bringing you life? Which ones are blocking you from experiencing the divine essence, the dabar, the creative energy of God? When we pay attention to our connections, we root ourselves in the holy. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Hebrew word for salvation means wide open space. It's one of my favorite words. Because there's freedom, there's wide open space when we root ourselves in the holy, when we see the world for the beauty and truth that is actually present there. When we're released from our twist, we see holy unity everywhere we look. We experience God not as an idea or a concept or a belief, but as divine essence, just purely experiencing God. So the third lesson is keep your focus on the joy. Okay, I know there's maybe some detractors to this, and I totally get that, and we can talk later. Maybe just for this Lent season, or maybe like a week, just 1 week, week number 2 in Lent, just try to go with it. Just see what happens. Just see what happens. Kondo tells a story of how one day she was a teenager who was super into cleaning. Isn't that just the most unique thing? Because I have to, and mine aren't. Just totally are not. They will not be the next Marie Kondo. I can just put money down right here about that right now. But as a teenager, she was she just wanted everything to be clean all the time. And one time she was so worked up about it that she passed out. Which, first of all, she's following her soul. She is doing her work on this planet, because clearly that was deeply ingrained. But also she said that when she came to after passing out, that she heard a voice say, "We should be choosing what we want to keep, not what we want to get rid of." She was 13. And that is the absolute core of her entire organizational method. Start with joy. Start with what feels good and right and true, and let that be your guide. That's being mindful of your connections, right? But it's also doing it in a way that feels freeing and not limiting. So Kondo is pretty adamant to say that her method is not minimalistic. I know that she's minimalistic, she's always wearing a crisp white top and a little skirt, and she has 3 things, I do not live like that. I know that when the Netflix thing came out, all my book people on Twitter were like, "She is a monster. She said 3 to 5 books only," We were all clutching our books in fear, Marie Kondo was going to come and take them all away. For the record, she said she only feels like she needs 3 to 5 books. That's what sparks her joy. And I was like, well, Marie, mine is 9,000. I'll let you know when I get to my limit. Nobody's touching the books. If it doesn't spark joy, I send it right to half price, but all the rest of these suckers are staying, okay? Because I love them. If I could sleep around the books, I would. If I could sleep on the books, I would. I love them. Sparks joy. Okay, so she just said, no, stick with what matters to you. I'm not telling you should only have 5 pairs of pants. I'm telling you should only wear pants that you like to wear. Right? It's not minimalistic, because minimalism asks us to determine the least amount we think we can have and stick with it. Okay? It asks us to go without and live with less. How many of you have done Lent that way? I have, right? How many of you approach your entire faith life that way? I grew up somewhat Baptist. We were casual Baptist goers, thank God, it saved me. My parents get so mad when I say that, but I'm it was better. It was less is more for me with that. But I was for sure taught not a lot about Lent, but for sure just the guilt. You just should let the guilt make you come to church and make you return to church and give you the money because of the guilt. It was all just based on you should feel bad about it, Okay, no. That's really not the best way to go about this. Kondo, in her organizational method, is asking us instead to live with what we cherish. As Casey said, to live with what's essential, what we really value. So when she starts to meet with a client, she has them sit in their house and she has them close their eyes and imagine the kind of life they want to live there. And then she says, okay, how can we make that happen? Right? That's not minimalism, that's integrity. That's what that is. So, for whatever it's worth for me, I don't believe that Lent is supposed to function as a negative house cleaning, where God, your nagging mother, tells you to clean up your room, pick up your things, and call her more often, for God's sake. You know? I pastored a church of people who were like very hesitantly, barely hanging on to Jesus, and so I had to learn how to talk about Lent in like the most gentle, positive way. Like, just stay with it. It's going to be fine. Just stick with me. And they just didn't want to have anything to do with that, and I don't blame them, right? Nobody wants to sign up for a negative house cleaning. The reason people sign up to do Marie Kondo's method is because it's like great, and you feel better afterward. You know, take up Taekwondo because you always wanted to. Like, good things happen because you cleaned your house in the Marie Kondo way. It doesn't work to be super negative about it all the time. So what if we just considered taking a good close look at our life patterns and daily rhythms and asking instead whether those are actually the patterns we want to have? Like, okay, here's a habit that I have. Is that just hanging around because I'm not paying attention to it? Or is it hanging around because I really want that habit and it's really benefiting me in some positive kind of way? Well, I don't know. Lent's a really good time to ask that question. Is that working for you? So what if we thought of Lent as like a spiritual clothing swap, where you realize that there are some things you aren't really wearing in your closet, they're just not fitting you right, and then you swap those things out for some other things that seem to fit where you are right now? The reason I say clothing swap is because the great thing about that is that you don't have to belittle yourself like every step of the way in the cleaning process. You don't have to take out this sweater and be like, I cannot believe I bought this sweater. It was so expensive. I do not know what I was thinking. It is terrible. It never looked good on me, you know? Why? Why do we do that, right? You can just say, this sweater's just really not for me right now. It may look great on somebody else. There's no judgment in a really good clothing swap. We actually, at my old church, used to have them because mostly we had a lot of like social workers and teachers that were 20-something and had no money. And so we would do these clothing swaps at my house. And it was so great. It was like the most positive female togetherness. It was so awesome. I wish I could bottle that energy because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm sick of wearing that jacket. I wore it like every day at work for a year. But it looks so good on you. You should totally get that, you know. People were saying, oh, that never fit me right, but that looks great with your coloring, you know. It was just this like affirmation fest where we were swapping around stuff that didn't work for us but might work for other people. It's just about finding the right fit, right? So spiritual practices in our lives are like that too. I mean, I'd say this all the time to people who are like, well, I really feel like I should do this. And as a spiritual director, I'm looking at them and I'm like, I don't think that's working for you. Not sure that's bringing you closer to Jesus, which is the point of the spiritual practice. Like, it seems like this is only bringing you frustration. You gave it a good go. You tried it out for a while. I'm not sure this is the one that's going to be the right fit for you long term. Right? Our spiritual practices are designed to help us grow spiritually in the same way that clothes are meant to clothe us. Like, they gotta fit. It's just about finding our right fit. And we can do that in a way that doesn't make us throw ourselves mercilessly under the bus while doing it. Because, spoiler alert, most of the time that backfires on us. Because as it turns out, feeling bad about ourselves is not particularly motivating. Like, you laugh, but I just cannot tell you how for like, I don't know, it's been 25 years that I've been a pastor or a chaplain or a spiritual director, and it's like you really have to convince people that the self-feeling bad thing is not going to get them where they want to go. It's never going to get you where you want to go. Like, you can try it if you want, you can try it. Just maybe trust me, as I tell my children, I'm right 89 to 90% of the time. And you should just know it's not going to get you where you need to go. And the reason is because we give up because the entire process itself, when we're trying to feel bad about something and we're trying to give something up, the entire process itself drains us of the very energy we need to make a change. Do you understand that? It's like we're constantly undermining our own transformation all the time. Just constantly undermining it by like just hitting our head against a wall of something that's not working and thinking that just like maybe we'll keep doing it and it will work. It will not work. Actually, Father Casey talked about this with this great picture of the lawnmower on Ash Wednesday service when he was like, you know, physics, I'm just gonna like keep trying to turn this bolt, and like, no, that's not the way the bolt went. So it's not ever going to work. right? So here's one way to check your intentions. You can ask, okay, am I trying to guilt myself or shame myself or negatively control myself? Or am I actually trying to figure out how to be in harmony with God within myself? Because there's a difference. And one of them is going to get you to where you need to go. Omerta defines hell as being permanently out of tune with our deepest meaning. And if we know and trust that our deepest meaning is to be in unity with God, then we will trust and follow that song. It's not minimalism, it's not reductionism, it's not shame or guilt. We're seeking harmony. And when we seek that harmony, we feel freedom because we trust the song, right? Gerald May actually describes this as the difference between willfulness and willingness. Willfulness relies on that stubbornness, that like, I'm going to sit there and work on this lawnmower until kingdom come. I'm just going to will it to happen, right? It's that human effort that so quickly runs out of energy. But willingness requires trust and letting go and allowing things to unfold. And freedom is not ever going to come from clenched fists and clinging. It comes from trust. So discipline that's good and right and true doesn't make us feel overly constricted. It makes us feel free. Because the spiritual disciplines that are designed for us for right where we are right now are designed to transform us and align us and attune us to the song of the universe. And that always feels healing to us. So what if we saw our personal freedom as living in tune with our deepest meaning, with the unity of God's song? What if we just decided to trust that if we followed that, we actually would get where God wants us to go? Because our human nature resides in that. We just have to take away the twist and see the reality for what it is. I love that Sister Macrina Wiederkehr says that being a disciple means seeing yourself through the eyes of the teacher who loves you. I'm not sure that's always the way that we talk about discipleship, but I think maybe it's a good way. This Lent, what if you started from the joy, from the connection, from the love of that divine essence that permeates every single subatomic particle filling this room? What if you start with that and stick with that and trust that? Ephesians 3:19 says, I ask that you'll know the love of Christ that is beyond knowledge, so that you will be filled entirely with the fullness of God. Filled entirely with the fullness of God. And how do we get there? We get there by knowing the love of Christ and resting in the joy and blessing that is God's abundant, steadfast love, that is the energy that permeates everything around us. That's how we get free. When we feel twisted, when we feel stuck, we're moving away from the harmony in the song. How do we get back? How do we get free? We trust. We listen to the heart of the world. I want to end with a poem that I love from Ted Loder. Partly because I'd never heard the word gentle used as a verb before. And I just really love that he does that. So I want to end with this. Gentle me, Holy One, into an unclenched moment, a deep breath, a letting go of heavy experiences, of shriveling anxieties, of dead certainties, that softened by the silence, surrounded by the light, and open to the mystery, I may be found by wholeness, upheld by the unfathomable, entranced by the simple, and filled with the joy that is you. Amen. Amen. Do you have questions or no? Thank you.
We do have about 5 minutes for questions. That's not a long time, but we've got 5 minutes, and then we need to make our way back down to the nave for compliment.
So you should for sure want to go to compliment, because I just explained to you how, like, you know, the whole universe is song. So it just would feel weird not to go and sing after that, right? Just feels like you should just hop in on that when it's all fresh in your mind. Any comments or questions? Okay.
What was the name of the bike messenger? The bird? What was his name?
Gordon, and I'll tell you, I think it's, what is Gordon's last name? Hold on. Hempton. Hempton. Gordon Hempton. Yes. And he has that documentary on PBS. It's worth watching. Well, thank you so much, and I hope we'll see you at Compliment.